Okay, welcome to the session for both EMEA and EMEA. We're excited to bring you this, how our clients are investing in change management, an open discussion about what's working for EMEA and EMEA partners. So today we have with us Smita Vadakekalam from Heller Consulting and Katrina Seidel from Vera Solutions. And I am going to pass it over to them to take over the session. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Kate. I just wanted to share a little bit about why we wanted to do this session, what the session's all about. We wanted to do this because we recognize there's some partner firms that have a formal change management practice and many who do not, but we all see the impact of change management challenges in our projects, and we all most likely engage in change management in some way, shape, or form, and it does affect the work we do. And just, I think in the last several years, there's been a lot of interesting trends and changes. And so we wanted to have a casual conversation to talk about what we're seeing in the industry, in our sector, when it comes to change management. And we just wanted to share, we're going to start with a informal conversation with Katrina and myself and sharing our perspective. We both are representing different regions and have different levels of change management practice at our firms. But the second half of this conversation, we really want to hear from you. So we actually have a couple of questions that we are going to put up on screen towards the second half of the conversation. We hope that it becomes a bigger roundtable and you can unmute yourself and share from your perspective what you're seeing. So I'll start with some intros and I'll just go first. I'm Smita Vadakekalam. My role is COO and Senior Strategist at Heller Consulting. Heller works with nonprofits and higher ed on tech strategy, Salesforce implementations, and change management. We do have a formal change management practice at Heller. It started about 6 to 7 years ago, and we work in EMEA. So our clients are in the US and Canada. And myself, I'm a change manager. The consulting I do is change management. And that is a little bit about me. I'll pass it along to Katrina.
Great. Thanks, Smita. And thanks everyone for being here, morning, afternoon across the globe. But I'm calling in from London. My name is Katrina Seidel, and I'm a Senior Business Development Manager with Vera Solutions. We're actually a global ISV and SI partner, and I have the unique role of serving, I would say, as a sales driver and just in this business development arena for both EMEA clients, some LACA clients actually, in EMEA and all the way over to APAC. So I've been with the organization for 2.5 years now, and certainly have a lot of conversations within the pre-sale around what change management looks like, and if it's not named, kind of how and what that's being brought up. So excited to be here and learn a bit from everyone who's here, and also just kind of foster a conversation around this.
Cool, thanks, Katrina. So we realized that change management is a use, and we may all have our different definitions of it, but we just wanted to start with making sure we're starting with a similar definition for this conversation. So we're using a definition that comes from the Association of Change Management Professionals, a global organization, and this is their standard. We're in this conversation talking about the practice of applying a structured approach to transition an organization from a current state to a future state to achieve expected benefits. So I share this because I think sometimes I've experienced personally when we talk about change management, sometimes I'm talking with IT departments and they're referring to the change control process, which is a little different. So we wanted to start with this definition. So that being said, I'm going to ask Katrina a question. I'm curious, Katrina, from where you sit, especially being in business development, do you see change management being mentioned during the sales cycle? And if so, how are clients talking about it? Do they use the word change management or other words to describe it? And how does it show up? in your experience?
Yeah, great question. And I think it wasn't until we started this conversation where I really got to doing some analysis on it. It's not something I analyze on a daily basis, but I will say, I think where it comes down to the fact that change management is rarely being brought up as a term within the pre-sale. I think in my time here at Vera, it's come up as a term probably 3 or 4 times. And that's primarily with, I would say, very large field implementations or strategic accounts with Salesforce.org in a formally competitive process. And there's already a big change management practice internally within the organization that we're working with. That being said, while it's not maybe mentioned from a kind of terminology standpoint, I think it really does come up in a number of different ways in the type of conversations that we're having, from the initial conversations and organizations identifying that they need a new technology, all the way through to kind of setting them up for success in a deeper funnel sale. So I'd say the conversations surface a lot around the people. And I think that's where I see a little bit of my role and our role in these pre-sale conversations around how can we factor the people as the kind of primary center part of any technology implementation. And it comes down to a few things of kind of what comes up in these calls. So I'd say certainly it's kind of from the onset beginning to set the vision for the system. And that's a key part of what we see in an implementation and change management, and starting to think about what the organization is going to get out of this in 5 to 10 years from now, and what the long-term value is. And really, I would say it's so common within common change management frameworks, forming that strategic vision in these very early conversations. And that's very consistent, I would say. And then thinking about I would say both the initial audience within the pre-sale, but also the end users of the system. So who will actually be using the system? And we at Vera Solutions do a lot of work in the impact measurement, program management, grant making space. And I think within that, there's kind of, unlike kind of some fundraising projects, for instance, there's a much wider group internally that are going to be end users. So whether it's grantees and thinking about what the change process might look like for them as they're using a new system, or if it's field data collectors in a kind of rural area across the globe, and some of the international implementations we do. So thinking about, I think, those end users. And then certainly also in these conversations, pinpointing what's changing for them and what is not. So having some conversations around what the technology is going to mean for them, but actually how so much of it is around the people too. So whereas the term may not come up, I think it's very common for these pieces to come up, and really I would say quite important for us to bring these pieces up, given what we see in implementations and how important this people piece is.
Thanks. That's really interesting and not surprising,
Yeah.
The word is not being used. I'm curious, Katrina, because you work with 2 different regions. You have EMEA clients and EMEA. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing those right, but
got it.
If you see a regional difference in how in the pre-sale or even in project, and how change management is handled or talked about.
Yeah. Again, another one of those questions that I think I sit in a unique position where I do have opportunities to have conversations with organizations in EMEA and in EMEA. I would say no. I think the general consensus there is that regionally there's not a lot of differences, but there's quite a few other dimensions that I think come into play that are very similar regionally. So the first one I would say is kind of the type of project or the type of implementation we're talking about. If it's a fundraising project, for instance, and kind of back to that kind of who's going to actually be using the system, maybe that's 10 to 20% of the company, and it's not rolling out as widely as, for instance, an impact measurement, which impacts 80% or so of the company. And I think in those projects, we're seeing change management, or at least the beginnings of it, come up a little bit more. Certainly, I would say organizational structure as well. So whether it's a funder or an implementer or a social enterprise, and as they're exploring these new systems, that also very much changes across those types of organizations. The size of the anticipated project. So if an organization is willing and going to commit to investing more, then most likely the change management piece is coming up more as there's a bigger commitment from the organization side. The staffing structure as well. I think something we see quite a lot is that staff may have all of the best intentions and motivations and really be capable to drive the internal change. However, they simply just don't have the time to dedicate to it. So it's a little bit of the volume of and what that staffing structure looks like. And then I would say international versus domestic work too. I think we do a lot of work with large INGOs that are working across the globe, and that's another dimension where it doesn't necessarily mean the change is more complex for some of these larger international organizations. And I think what we find is actually in those contexts, change management might be discussed a little bit more, given the wider use of the system and the wider rollout. Yeah.
Thanks. That's really interesting. And thanks for sharing that. Any of you who do work with various regions, and if you do have, experience or see any differences or anything you notice from your perspective, feel free to share in the chat.
Yeah, would be great to learn from others here too. And Smita, I'd love to then put the conversation kind of back on you, as you have started this change management practice internally at Heller. What I would say led to the formalization of your practice?
Yeah, sure. To be honest, what led to that was a little bit of a selfish or personal reason. I have been with Heller for 16 years, so I've been doing, implementations for a while now. And in the first, I would say 10 years of that or so, or first 6 years or so, I started to, wonder, why aren't these projects more successful? Because, I had good project management skills, learned about good timeline, budget, scope, but there was still this sense of something was missing. It just felt unsatisfactory. Like we couldn't address something else. And for me, I wondered, maybe this is just how it is, and maybe I should think about a different career. But what it did lead me to was learning about change management, the discipline. And I had never, I don't think, really knew about it before that point, or I heard about it, but really learning about and discovering it, put a name to all the things that I was experiencing in a project, the people stuff, right, that comes up that are barriers to a successful project. And previous to that, I had thought it's my responsibility. We are in this limited role as a consultant with budget, a limited budget scope and all the timeline, are supposed to make sure we take care of all of that and do all of it. And once I learned that there's this deep and rich field called change management that addresses this, I realized, it's not, that's a silly expectation. Exciting. And I honestly, I felt empowered, like, okay, so there's a way to address this. So I first started by just learning about it for myself to feel, okay, well, let me see if I can borrow some tools from this discipline, apply it to our projects. And that's how we started in the beginning, by just internally at Heller, just, okay, this is how we can address some of the people stuff. And then later on, as we started doing more and more of this, realized that we have to do some thought leadership to the sector, because how are organizations going to invest in this if we're not talking about it? So I think we shifted to really doing a lot of thought leadership on change management. And since then, that allowed us to develop a formal practice, because now we have folks who are certified, and we can, more folks in the sector understand what it is, and understand how, are investing in it. So started as a selfish pursuit, but it did ended up being a good thing for us overall.
Yeah, and you may not have known at the time too just how much it would grow in terms of a topic in so many contexts as well. Yeah, really interesting. Now that it has almost been 10 years, or I guess 10 years since you named change management internally, have you seen many changes in how it's discussed and executed upon?
Yeah, I love that question. I have, which is exciting, because, and I'm going to share this in parallel with what I've seen with project management, because I do remember about 16 years ago when we were, when I first became a project manager, got my PMP, and we would charge our clients project management, just a little line item our clients would question, what is that? What is this project management thing? And we would have to like explain what timeline works. And that has changed significantly over the last 10 years. And we're working with clients with sophisticated PMOs and project managers. And that, at least in the sector we worked with, the clients, we've seen such a growth and an acceptance of project management in the nonprofit sector. Now, I hope that's where change management as a discipline is going. The two things that I have as like a measurement for that is about 7 years ago, I started attending the Association of Change Management Professionals Global Conference. If there's anyone who has attended, please chat. Or if you haven't, I highly recommend it. I've attended every year since then. And I started because I was curious about this field, to see what was out there. And at that time, and probably still is, most of the attendees were like from big corporations, oil and gas, mostly insurance, some healthcare, but there was no nonprofit representation at all. Maybe one. And every year I would put a little like meetup or a group at that conference, anyone in the nonprofit sector, show up here. And so there'd be one or two. And then the last conference we had on site, which was 2 years ago, there was a nice gathering about 10 or four organizations, which that is a big change. That was really exciting to see. And these were people who had a former role at their organization to do change management. So that was wonderful to see. Also, another thing that since we've done thought leadership on this topic, we would do a webinar, and there was a survey, a poll I would always include in that presentation. And it was mostly because I was curious about who's doing this, who knows what change management is. And this is only to the nonprofit sector. And the question would say, do you practice change management or know what it is at your organization? So 6 or 7 years ago, and I have conducted that poll several times a year since then. 6 or 7 years ago, percentage of people who said, no, I have no idea what that was about 80%. And there's maybe a tiny percentage that said, yeah, we know what it is and we sort of do it. This past year, I conducted that poll, and it was really interesting. It was about, there was about 50% who said, wow, we know what it is. We do some form of it. And that was amazing to see. That's a big change. So there is a lot more recognition and understanding of it. Even the clients we work with, they are purchasing it, they're investing in it. So I do see a change, and I think it's going to grow, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. And I think as you've had these learnings from attending this conference for so long, can you offer anything in terms of what we can learn from the private sector in change management, and really what needs to be done to be successful in the nonprofits and education space that we work in?
Yeah, so I think the biggest learning is probably that the private sector seems to be investing in change management from what I can see. That's why you have a lot of these companies attending change management professionals, several, they have CMOs, and they understand anytime we're doing any major technology change, we need change management, and they invest in it. I think the nonprofit sector can definitely adopt and learn from that. And of course, it may not be at the same scale, but I hope to see that happen. Now, at the same time, what I love is that I think that when we borrow something from the private sector, we don't just scale it down. To me, that's just, I think what happens is the nonprofit sector takes that, adapts it, tweaks it, and creates something new that's appropriate to the nonprofit sector. And I believe actually something better or more innovative and magical will happen. So I'm looking forward to that, to see how the nonprofit sector takes change management and creates something really innovative.
Yeah, and I think that's actually leads us to a good question for our audience, while we have quite a few here today. I guess curious to hear, and feel free to unmute. Are you allowed to unmute? Can we do that in this one? I hope so.
Yeah, everybody can unmute.
Okay, great.
You can come off video. I can Yeah, we can do all of that. So
okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So just curious to hear from others on this call. You can feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute. What are the most common and difficult change management challenges that you see your clients face? Love it to start a bit of an open conversation around that.
Did you mean my name?
Sorry?
Whose name did you mention?
Just anyone on the call. I'm not calling out individuals, but you're welcome to share.
Okay. Well, often customers are hesitating to reserve enough budget for a serious implementation. If it works technically, then a lot of people think, okay, it works, it's okay. But in fact, then the whole story starts. Then it should start running. And it's not always easy to convince people that you need a serious amount of money after the technical implementation.
Yes, that I agree with that. We often face that too. Thanks for sharing. Is there anything you've seen that helps? I don't know, with that?
What helps is you can make some dashboards about user adoption. They are available on the Exchange platform.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives a lot of information who is working with the products and who is not. Sometimes I'll also add a flow trigger. So every time that a flow is triggered, I do an extra count on an object to see that it is triggered, so that you can see how often that is done and by who. Can give very interesting information, because flows or process builders or whatever usually often indicate if processes that you have adopted especially for them are used or not.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think Erin brings up a good point on just how the system could be utilized to show the organization how they're actually using the system and adopting it, which is, some of, I think, what I've seen in some of the other sessions across the summit. And it'd be great to refer, maybe, I don't know if he'll be sharing the content, but Tim Lockey's session from yesterday talked about some of those dashboards they set up. We also have some comments in the chat that oftentimes clients just think that change management is a fancy term for training. We have that from Craig, which I'm sure you guys see often, and have to, explain what change management really is and how it's not just training.
Yeah, I see that. I think a lot of I would agree with that. No, I would agree with the fact that it is more than training, and have definitely heard that. And I think, like, I'm looking at the chat, a lot of folks have addressed that with some really great points. It is more than that. And I'm a fan of ProSci. Someone is talking about the ADKAR method. Yeah, I think, like, I'm just reading through the comments here, and anyone who wants to, comment on this, feel free to unblock yourself. But I'm going to, what is the best way to drive adoption before the system materializes? That's a great question. I'm happy, I'll share some top of my head, some thoughts on that. I think that, to me, one of the key starting points is that clear why statement, the vision statement, however you want to call it, but that simple statement that gets folks or the stakeholders at the organization understanding why they're doing this project and it should relate ideally to the mission of the organization. If that's missing, in my experience, has caused a lot of what happens is people walk away with their own definition of why this project is happening. And sometimes it's not in their interest and therefore they're not going to participate. I also think getting buy-in and involvement, leadership is critical of getting good leadership and sponsorship. The organization, I think managing resistance is a key component to it, which is something that I think can be very uncomfortable at times, but I believe resistance is not always a bad thing. I just think the number one thing you want to avoid is ignore it and pretend it will just go away, because that never happens, but trying to confront it more and figure out strategies on how to manage it. And sometimes it could lead to actually good solutions. But anyone else have thoughts or ideas on that?
I would share, this is Emily Eakin, I'm with Traction on Demand. And I would just say that one of the hardest parts of change management for me has been around performance management, right? You know, that what gets measured gets done. And so working with the HR team to change performance management so that teams no longer kind of hoard or silo donors or records or data or information, and are all incentivized to share and maximize the potential of constituents and collaborate, has been one of the most effective ways that I've been able to really affect change.
Thank you for sharing, Emily. I love that, and how you kind of get to the performance management. Sometimes there's only so much as a consultant when it comes to some of that accountability stuff about what is that person's responsibility. Sometimes it's getting to their job description or their goals, or that expectation has to come from the organization. So I love that. Thanks for sharing, Emily. Someone noted having clear objectives from the start is key. Often is what we want to replace our old CRM. I think POCs can help as well. Someone has to help me. What does POCs stand for? I'm embarrassed to say, but
proof of concept.
Proof of concept. You know, I'm sorry. I've been in some DEI sessions, so I'm thinking person of color, but I know that's not. Thank you, Arun.
This is Brian Pickett with North Peak. I think Julie has a comment here about how people want to replace their old CRM. Sometimes it's about positioning the project. And this, if someone says they want a new CRM, that's like a tech swap. And with these initiatives, I mean, this is really a point in time change where we were bad at something and we're going to be good at something. And it involves all kinds of different moves, some that, like Emily just pointed out, where people's job descriptions might change. But the way they approach their work is probably going to change for this to be really successful. And so if the positioning of the project is around those business benefits, the reasons we're doing this, and not just like we need new tech, then I think you give yourself more room and more buy-in to have conversations that recognize people's lives are changing with this move.
I love that. Thank you, Brian. Really, really good point. It's more than an IT project. Great. I realize we had 2 more questions, but we are at time, I believe. We have 1 minute to maybe get this.
Yeah, we have 1 minute. We have 1 minute for any other questions or closing thoughts.
Katrina, and anyone else can mute themselves if they have an answer to this, but what are your thoughts about what's our role as partners to help solve? What's our responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I see a huge responsibility. At the end of the day, it's people who are using the technology, and we just heard that from Brian too. And people don't like change. I mean, if you think about what's changed over the course of the last year, even, and we're just resistant to certain things. So I think collectively, just continuing this conversation as the Salesforce ecosystem is quite important, and continuing to embed these conversations as early as possible with clients and collaborate on learnings too, like shifting, I would say, the way that nonprofits think about this and what you've seen over the last few years and decade, actually, Smita. It's exciting to hear what could come in the coming years if we continue to invest in just thought leadership around it and continuing to invest the people conversations from the onset.
Great.
And anything from you?
Everything you said. The only thing I would add is be willing to have difficult conversations in the context of the project with the leadership at your client orgs. Like, it's hard, but name what those barriers are. We see them, and sometimes the client themselves can't maybe not see it as well, but be willing to have those difficult conversations. I think it all helps us. Great. Well, I think we're at time. So thank you all. Wish we had more time to hear from all of you and share.
I know, for sure. And I've popped up a poll. If you'll take that on your way out, I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Smita and Katrina, for being here with us and talking about this important topic. Really appreciate it.
Thanks
Enjoy
for all
your
the
next session.
too.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.